You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer.
Complete Developer Podcast is supported by listeners like you. We are now on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Complete Developer Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. This week, we're discussing salary negotiations with Josh Doody, author of The Fearless Salary Negotiation. We'll be going over some of the common questions that developers have about negotiating. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Well, we're still finishing up a product at work, and I got up this morning. I plan first thing. I remote in and I see what's on my schedule, and I go, okay, here's what I'm going to do today, and I kind of set my goals. And I thought, okay, I've got 3/4 of the day to work today. Yeah, I got in. I think I actually coded for 45 minutes to an hour total today. The rest of the day was meetings, including pre-meeting meetings. Yeah. This day was like just totally didn't work out. But you know, I survived that. I mean, that's part of what's going on right now. There's just a lot of churn, a lot of figuring out where things need to be. So I guess it's not entirely unexpected, but then the nice thing is like that list of stuff I plan to do today, all I got to do is copy and paste it to tomorrow.
Nice. That works.
Yeah, nothing got done. So it's that's easy. The other thing I wanted to throw out here too is I'm looking to get some speaking in. Beej has been razzing me about it, as have my buddies in my mastermind group. And they're like all speaking now. So if anybody out there in our audience has got something in the Southeast that I could speak at, throw me a line. So how about you, Josh?
Yeah, I've got sort of two things. One was just me doing something I for my business, which was just kind of trying to make sure the sort of high level description of it is trying to make sure that when people find me online, that I'm able to send them useful stuff right away. And so that means a lot of sort of, email marketing type stuff where I just want to make sure that people are getting the right thing. And so I also want to engage with people when they come and find me, so I can figure out how they found me and what they're looking for, so I can make sure that I give that to them. So that was something that I did that was really great over the past maybe 2 weeks. The second thing, though, is I had an article published on Glassdoor last week, Glassdoor.com. Yeah, fantastic, great news. And then at the moment that I got all that fancy new email stuff to help me interact more with new subscribers, I just got buried in email. So the thing I'm fighting right now is just trying to get back to inbox zero. I've been desperately flailing away for like 10 days now, which is a great problem to have. But I feel similarly in that I have all this long list of things that I'm supposed to be doing, and the list does not include answer emails all day, every day. So it's great. I'm getting tons of information. It's doing exactly what I was hoping it would do in terms of interacting more with people who find me online, but I was not expecting the volume at the time that I got it. So that's derailed my plans for about the past week or so, but good problem to have. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
That is a good problem to have. We started a new project at work this past week, and I've been having some fun setting up the dev environment in Visual Studio. Interesting issues with dependency injection and authorizations of all things, but I've got most of them sorted out, so we're a little bit ahead on the sprint. And this afternoon, our front-end developer spent some time training me on Angular components, which the last app we did mostly directives and controllers, and so he did a really good job on it. I was kind of impressed with his training abilities, so looking forward to working with him on this project. But with that said, let's go ahead and roll the music and get into some IoTs. This week for IoTs, I have an interesting kind of device or set of devices. It's called the Wasp Mote Plug and Sense. Now, this is an IoT sensor grid with interchangeable probes that include over 120 different sensors. They're solar powered, enclosed, and built to be waterproof and used indoors and out. You can program them over the air through their API, and it's kind of cool. Though this isn't for the average hobbyist, because the starter kit is around $500 on Amazon. But I ran across this because I was looking up different solutions for greenhouses. and they have a pretty cool solution for like moisture and heating and stuff like that in the greenhouse. So who's talking to us this week?
Well, we grabbed an iTunes review from K-Path Apps. Says, accidentally ran into this podcast, and man, I got hooked after listening to the 2 most recent episodes. Already in the process of downloading the backlog to catch up. Keep it up, guys.
Hey, thanks for the comment. Send us an email at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com with your address, and we will send you a Complete Developer water bottle. And guys, if you'd like your very own Complete Developer water bottle, leave us a review in iTunes or comment on the website or any of our social media. We post all our episodes to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Google+. We're also on Path and Tumblr. I want to take a moment right now just to remind y'all that our friend Bethany Adams has released her second book. And so to celebrate, we're running another contest where we'll be giving away an autographed copy of one of her books. It'll be the winner's choice. We'll be announcing the winners the first episode in May. And to enter, all you have to do is leave us a review in iTunes. We love seeing those 5 stars.
So, I guess it's time to begin. Josh Doody began his career as a computer and electrical engineer before transitioning to consulting and project management in the talent development industry. With everything he learned in that industry, he wrote Fearless Salary Negotiation, a #1 bestseller on Amazon, along with several courses to help excel in job interviews, salary negotiations, and pursuing raises the right way. Now he helps people earn more money and get paid what they are worth with simple tactics that he has developed as a hiring manager and salary negotiation coach.
So Josh, one of the questions that I really like to ask people before we get into the episode is, what got you into computers?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the first real memory I have of a computer, this is going to date me pretty badly, is a computer in my English teacher's class that was a DOS, one of those IBM machines from the 90s, had solitaire on it. And I just remember one of my first memories of computers is seeing the little bouncing cards after you win solitaire, going back and forth across the screen. But the thing that really got my attention was I remember just being really fascinated by the fact that you could go up to a computer and there was a little, C:/ prompt, right? And you could type in a command and the computer would give you something back. And so I remember one of the first ones I learned was the dir command for the directory. And you'd say dir and it says, here's what's in the directory. And it's like, oh, interesting. And so that, I don't know why, I can't explain why, but I think it was just fascinating to me that there was this, box of metal and plastic sitting on a desk with a monitor on it. And then I could talk to it, even though I had to talk in its language. And that really blew my mind. And so from then on, I became more and more interested in computers and sort of obsessed with them. It also helped that, I loved playing video games on Nintendo and Super Nintendo when I was a kid. And so I think that's my first, computer memory was that DOS IBM computer with the clickety-clack keyboard on it in my English teacher's class.
Yeah, I still have people giving me a hard time because like how those keyboards, you had to hit them kind of hard.
Oh, yeah.
I still type that way. And so I go through about 2 keyboards a year.
Oh, it's bad because when he's in the other room at his desktop with his keyboard, you can hear him on the mic in here.
Yeah,
just pounding away on the keys, right? I used to have a manager like that. His name was Dan, and Dan, he eventually ended up going and finding a way to buy like those old IBM mechanical keyboards because he would just destroy any modern keyboard. And because he just was so aggressive with the keys or whatever. And so he actually ended up going backwards. He destroyed so many keyboards. He said, what, I'm just going to get one of these, really quality industrial design mechanical clicky-clack keyboards. And so you can hear him, but it's because he's, trying to use a keyboard that he's not going to destroy in, a couple of hours.
That sounds very familiar. I've had people ask me if I'm under fire, actually.
Right. That's what it was like. You walk by his office and like, man, what's going on in there?
Yeah. It's like, good morning, Vietnam. It's not good, man.
So to get started, how do you figure out what kind of rate to ask for your first job?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I like the way you phrased it because it immediately gives me some things to kind of grab onto here that'll be interesting. My first answer to that is you shouldn't ask for a rate. What you might want to do is some market research to understand what rate you can expect to get in the ballpark. And so what I mean is, in this world, Pesa.com is a place that I like to point a lot of people because they do sort of, what should I be making as an entry-level engineer at Google in Mountain View? right? Or whatever your company and job and region is. You can get a sense of what that is. So I think it's good to go into job offers and negotiations with an idea of what to expect, and even more specifically, what I call your minimum acceptable salary, which is not only what do you expect, but what's the minimum that I require to take this job? What's my line in the sand where I'll say, you know what, this isn't a good enough salary or good enough compensation package, so I'm going to hold out. I'm going to not accept this offer unless they can modify it to meet my minimum. So I think you go in with an idea of what to expect, and you do that based on market research on sites like pesa.com, or we mentioned glassdoor.com earlier. I like Glassdoor because it's easy to use and has very, very broad data set. PayScale is another good one. But to zoom out a little bit, I actually don't recommend that people ask for a salary. I recommend that you not mention salary and avoid that conversation as long as you possibly can, even for your first job, until you get a job offer. And then once they make you a job offer, now you've got a ballpark idea of what they are looking to pay for somebody with your skill set and experience, which you just mentioned as entry level maybe. And then you can negotiate from there. So I think you should know what to expect. I don't think that you should ask for a salary, but wait to be made an offer, and then you can react to that offer.
I mean, that's pretty similar to the advice I gave Beach, I think, when he was starting, wasn't it? I mean, I basically told you, like, the first person to drop a number loses, or something along those lines. It was not quite as refined as your answer, I guess.
Yeah. Well, with my situation, it was a little bit different because I work for the state, so they don't have as much negotiation ability. They have, this is what we pay for this job.
Right. And it's all, a lot of times it's all public. You can just look it up online and see, if you're replacing somebody, what were they making?
And the nice thing about it is, though, what they were paying is what I needed to get by, and so it worked out. I did have one place that is interesting. I'd like to get your opinion on this. I interviewed with them, and when I went in, the job posting said one number, and I interviewed. First round on the phone, second round in person, third round they ended up taking me to a hockey game.
Nice.
Oh yeah, it was pretty cool. Then a week later, they make me an offer that was a lot less than what they had advertised.
Interesting. How much less? Like in percentage terms, how much less? Was it 10% less? Was it 50% less?
Probably about 10 to 15% less.
That's pretty unusual. It's unusual, one, that they even posted the number to begin with, and then unusual, two, that they posted a number and then made you an offer under that number. So what did you do? And I can tell you kind of what my thoughts are there.
I turned it down because I had a better offer.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I would say turn it down, but certainly I would have come back at him.
What eventually happened was I turned it down. I came back with, hey, I've got an offer for this much, and I mean, you guys said one thing and are coming back with another, and their response was, well, you're a little bit more junior than what we were looking for, and that's why we offered you less. And I was like, well, I need to make at least what I'm getting offered at the other place to even consider it. They didn't get back to me in time, and I took the other job.
I think you handled that pretty well. I mean, you're sort of intuitively using what I referred to earlier as your minimum acceptable salary, right? And that number could be different for different roles. In your case, it sounds like it was, you were using kind of a common number across companies, but I think it's important to have that number in mind and then to stick to the number, because chances are that whenever you set that number, whenever you say, here's the minimum that I can accept for a job because that's what I require to live, that's what I require to pay my bills, or that's just what I require to do that kind of work, you're probably a lot more objective than you are later on when they make you an offer and you're kind of up against it and thinking, well, I really do need to get a paycheck pretty soon. And so you can kind of buy yourself some objectivity by front loading that, by setting your minimum acceptable salary. I also think you did the right thing by, baselining it based on what you had another offer that was better. And so that tells you that somebody in the market is willing to pay you more than the offer that you had. And chances are that's not an anomaly. So it's possible that you found the only company in the world who would pay you more than the low offer that you got from the first company, but probably not. And so that's good information to have. And I think, you can be fluid in that sense of, each company can have its own minimum, but also you can kind of adjust your minimum based on new information you get. So my minimum used to be 50,000, but now I've got an offer in hand for another company at 60,000. So my minimum just went up to 65,000 at this other company for reasons X, Y, and Z. In general, my strategy is that you should counteroffer always. And typically that counteroffer would be 10 to 20%. So in your case, let's say that you didn't have the other offer outstanding. You just had the one offer. They advertised the number. They made you an offer that was 10% below that number. I think that you could counter them at 20% or 25% above their offer, which would then put you in range to negotiate up to or above the posted number. You could also just state your minimum, which it sounds like more or less what you did, and just say, thank you for the offer, but the least I can expect to do this job is my minimum. And you're sort of just like pulling the ripcord there and giving them an ultimatum. And then the third option is, depending on how low, that's why I asked how much below the published number or your expected number was your actual offer, is what I call a lowball situation. I don't particularly like that term, but it's the one everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say it, so I kind of use it. That's when your 10 to 20% of counteroffer wouldn't necessarily get you up to whatever your minimum would need to be. And so what my technique there is to sort of try and get the company to negotiate against themselves, because you can see the negotiation is more or less already lost if they're not even close to your minimum. And so you essentially reset it by communicating to them that the offer they made you is disappointing and asking them if they can do better. And so that way you're not using your counteroffer, which is sort of your big hammer, and you're asking them, why don't you make me another offer and I'll react to that offer because this one's disappointing. And a lot of times they'll significantly change their offer when they realize that you're a little bit more expensive than they thought they were going to be able to get you for.
I kind of have a little bit of another follow-up there with because where I'm at, I just converted from contract to permanent. How would you suggest handling the salary negotiation with that?
Yeah, so this comes up for me going both ways, actually. Sometimes people are going contract to perm, and sometimes people are kind of striking out on their own, and they're, sometimes even breaking away from a salary job to freelance for the same company. And they're trying to figure out, what do I bill this company? And so, if you had a contractor, hourly rate and you're going to salary, typically, I would say that because the salary, there are a lot of sort of variables here. So I'll ask you for one of them. When you were a contractor, were you a totally independent, like 1099 contractor, or were you a W-2 contractor?
I was W-2.
Okay. So that makes it actually quite a bit easier, because a lot of times the benefits that are offered for that W-2 contractor position look a lot like the benefits for the full-time position. And really what they're doing is just saying, look, this hourly thing is kind of a lot of work for us, and we really prefer just to have you on our staff full-time. So let's figure out what that salary is. And the salary may look pretty close to apples. So whatever your hourly rate is times, I think the magic number is 2080. We'll get you to a kind of a ballpark of what that hourly rate translates into for annual salary. What I would do in that case, though, is I would use that number that I just said again as a baseline. So I would say, okay, well, if all things considered equal, if the benefits are the same for my W-2 contractor position as they are as a full-time employee, then I would expect a salary that looks approximately like 2,080 times my hourly rate. But that's a number for you to keep in your head. And what you really want to know is how do they value you? And so if they said, hey, we'd like to bring you on full time, this hourly thing isn't great, and we know that we might be sharing you with some other companies, and we need all your expertise to help us out here, then you would say, great, that's interesting to me. I like my setup right now. I'd be curious to know what you have in mind. And so you're trying to induce them to actually make you a numerical offer, and then you can take that offer and sort of compare it against your baseline of just full-time salary versus hourly, and then you can negotiate from there. Even going contract to full-time, you should negotiate that salary, because you're kind of increasing your risk as a person. You're no longer sort of a independent contractor or freelancer able to kind of move around, and now you have one. You go from any number of clients that you might have had to one, and that means you have a lot more risk involved. If they go through a round of layoffs, a lot of times it's last in, first out for that kind of thing. So you got to take that into account. So I would let them make an offer and then negotiate it, kind of almost like a typical one, but baselining against apples to apples, contractor hours to full time salary.
Okay, that makes sense. What happened with me was, because I work for the state, they have a baseline that they pay for that level. And they told that to me. I said, well, I need to make at least what I'm making now. And then they came back with a little bit more than that. And I probably could have negotiated more. I don't know if I should or shouldn't have, but when they came back with more than what I said I would take, I just said, yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of back to what we were talking about earlier. Is I wouldn't say the first person to name a number ldon't but that does put you in kind of a weird spot where you said, I'd like to make X, and they say, okay, how about X plus 10? And you go, okay, I don't know if you ever watched the show Shark Tank, but the sharks get kind of miffed when you come in asking for something in the tank, and then you realize that you're more valuable than that. You start asking for more. You start kind of upping the valuation for your company or whatever. They don't like that. And so I'm not saying that you should not negotiate in that situation, but I might try to avoid kind of being in that situation seeing what's the best offer I can get from them before I ever say a number. But it sounds like, to be honest with you, that you did pretty well for yourself and you got more than you were hoping for. So
yeah, I think you did pretty well based on the rates I'm seeing around here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what they offered me was a fair rate for my skill level and experience level. So I think it was really good. This kind of leads into the next question, which is, do you think developers have to change jobs to get pay raises?
I like this question a lot because the answer is no. And I know, so the biggest pay raises that you probably are going to get in your career will be when you change jobs. And there are lots and lots of reasons for that. But that's just the truth, is that the big jumps usually happen when you change jobs. However, there are great opportunities at your current job, at your current company, if you're a valued employee, to get significant pay raises if you pursue them in a way that makes sense to the manager. So let me unpack that a little bit. There's a big difference between going to your manager and saying something like, I'd like a raise because I just bought a bigger house and I have a mortgage now. That doesn't do anything to help drive the bottom line of the company. And so it's not a compelling reason for you to go ask for a bunch more money. So contrast that with going to your manager and saying, I would like a raise because the last time my salary was set was 18 months ago. And when we set that, I was pretty close to entry level and you had certain expectations for me and my growth. And I've exceeded those expectations and growth expectations because now I'm doing these three things. And here's what I think the value to our team is for those three things. And you try to quantify it. So I'm managing more projects than you expected me to. And those projects each have a value of $100,000. So I've got 2 additional projects. That means I'm managing another $200K of business every year. That's valuable to you. Also, I've put some processes in place that help everybody save 2 hours a week on our team. And we've got 10 people, so we're saving, half a full-time equivalent every week on our team. That's pretty valuable to you. And so because I've done these things, which were not anticipated when my last salary was set, I'd like to talk about getting a raise too. And then you would state an actual number based on the kind of research that we talked earlier. How do we make that happen, right? And so if you're continuing to accumulate skills, if you're continuing to do valuable activities for the company, and I define valuable more or less as helping the company meet its goals, which are usually profit, then you can go to your manager and make a really strong case that, look, here's the stuff that I'm doing that you didn't anticipate. Here's the value that I put on it. Here's what I would like to be compensated. Can we talk about this? And now you've done all the homework for your manager and given yourself a pretty strong case and a pretty good chance at getting some sort of raise and possibly a really substantial raise, because now you're going to have to talk about the merits of your case as opposed to just, backing up and saying, I like more money because I have a bigger mortgage. There's no case there. There's nothing to discuss. And so it's a binary decision for them. So the answer to your question is yes, I think you can get significant raises by not changing companies. And I think changing companies in the long run is probably where your biggest pay bumps will come from throughout your career.
So how do you know when it's time to actually ask for a raise at work?
Yeah, there are a couple of criteria that I had there. The first one I kind of already covered, so I won't backtrack too much on that. But, are you doing value added things for the business that were not anticipated when your salary was set? And so that sounds jargony, but what I'm really saying is you should not expect to get a pay raise because you've been at the company another 6 months if you're not doing anything additional to what you were hired to do. So they hired you, they agreed to pay you a salary. And if you continue to do exactly the things that they hired you to do, then your salary is probably about appropriate. And so you want to make sure that you're doing value add things over time and documenting those things and understanding the value of them so that you can then demonstrate to your manager that you should be paid more. I don't know if I answered your question there.
Yeah, you did.
So what about when you work in a company that has set annual raises based on performance? Can you ask for more of a raise?
Yes. So this is kind of the second part of my answer. Your follow-up here helps me to kind of keep going because I dropped the ball on the second half of the answer earlier. So the timing question was the first question. When do you ask for a raise? And I said, when you're doing more valuable stuff that wasn't anticipated. The second part of it is what you're asking now, which is, okay, but there also needs to be budget for it. So even if you're doing value add things and you're doing a great job, if you time your request wrong, you may simply run into the fact that there's not more money to give you. So it's not that you're not making a good case. It's not that you have a lack of valuable assets or valuable additions that weren't anticipated. It's that your timing is bad and there's no money. So if there's a sort of fixed annual amount that everyone gets, that's probably not a good time to ask for a raise. And the reason that fixed amount is set the way it is there's a giant budget, possibly as high as like the corporate level that's then divvied up among business units, that's divvied up among departments in those business units, and then managers in those departments. And then each person that reports to each manager gets some little slice of that pie. And so for you to get a bigger raise than whatever has been budgeted for you essentially requires somebody else to get less of a raise or no raise at all. And so it's essentially a fixed budget pie. Contrast that with, let's say you wait 6 months. So I think what you're describing is what I call a focal process, which is everybody gets reviewed and gets their raise at the same time. And there's a fixed budget for raises, and it looks pretty similar for most people. Maybe there's a little bit of variance. So maybe the average raise is, 3%. You get 4%, somebody else gets 2%. But I don't think, any of us really consider that a significant raise or a big raise. It's just a little bit bigger than expected. So if you wait 6 months, now that budgeting process is over, all those raises have been handed out, and you go to your manager and you make a really strong case that you're doing a lot of value added things. Then your manager can usually go to HR and say, hey, Josh just came to me and said, he made a really good case that he's doing a lot of additional valuable stuff. He's really been impressing me. We were only able to give him 3% at his last annual raise, but do we have any budget available for another increase for him right now, for a market increase? Because I suspect that he's starting to accumulate skills that are pretty valuable on the market, and we should compensate him according to what people make on the market. That's the kind of conversation that you can induce by going to your manager or HR at a time when you're not sharing a budget with everybody. So the analogy that I like to use for this, I call this your birthday budget as opposed to your Christmas budget. So I sent this story to my mailing list a couple of months ago. When I was a kid, back to video games, the first time I saw a Nintendo, I wanted one real bad. And so immediately went to my dad and said, Dad, I want a Nintendo. Christmas is coming up. Let's make this happen. I was really excited about getting a Nintendo. And then on Christmas morning, I opened all my presents, and sure enough, there was no Nintendo. The reason was that everybody in my family had to get presents, and getting Josh a Nintendo meant that other people couldn't get the presents that they would want. They'd have to get either smaller presents or no presents. So I was on a Christmas budget. Not a good time to ask for a big thing like a Nintendo in my family. However, my dad said, look, I understand how disappointed you are. He could see I was, basically devastated. Little Josh was devastated. And he said, let's talk about this again at your birthday in a few months. My birthday is 3 months after Christmas, and we'll see what we can do. And so sure enough, my birthday rolls around, and I was able to get a Nintendo because I was on my birthday budget, not the Christmas budget. And so that's the analogy I like to use, is I had my very own birthday budget because they were buying a single present for a single person at kind of an off-cycle time. And so it's important when you go to ask for a raise that you have a really strong case, but it's also important to kind of zoom out and look at the landscape and say, is this a good time for me to ask for a raise? Is there budget? Is the company doing well? For example, let's say you're off cycle, you're 6 months out from that review period, but your company just had a round of layoffs because profitability has been down. Probably not a great time to ask for a big raise. It might be, but probably not. So you do want to be conscious of sort of the higher level landscape and the budgeting factors that would, impact the company's ability to give you an extraordinary raise within the system they have set up.
That actually kind of leads into the next thing. What are the most common things people screw up during salary negotiations?
Yeah, so let me ask you a clarifying question there. I think of salary negotiations as sort of two animals, and we've talked about both of them a little bit here. One of them is I'm at my company and I want to negotiate a higher pay rate at my current job, and the other one is I'm changing companies and I want to negotiate my starting salary at the new company. Which one are you more interested in?
I think the answer to that question is yes.
Yeah,
that's fair.
because both of those are questions that both of those are things I'm interested in knowing personally.
Well, with our developer launchpad group, when we talk to people trying to get jobs and people that are at jobs trying to go up, we kind of get both sides of this. So I'm not sure. I think I would say I'm equally interested as well.
Okay, great. So let's start with where we just kind of were, which is you're at your current company and you want to try and get a raise. So before I answer, I will say I have a course that specifically is designed to answer this question. It's a course on 5 really common salary mistakes that people make when they're asking for raises. So I'm going to plug that real quick. You can get it for free at freeraisecourse.com. So if you go to freeraisecourse.com, and I'll share that link with you guys after the show, you can get this course that will walk you through in a lot of detail. And I think you might even see the birthday budget email in there. So the most common mistakes are asking for a raise for reasons that don't matter to the company. So again, back to I got a big house and I need a raise to pay my mortgage. I try not to be too mean about this, but I was a hiring manager and you get requests like this. And my response was always, I don't care. I'm happy for you that you bought a big house, but that's not the company's problem. Our company does not exist to help you pay your mortgage. It exists to make a profit and return value to shareholders, right?
That's actually one of my pet peeves. I know a guy that that's the way he tries to negotiate. It's, I've got all these expenses and therefore you should pay me more. And it's like, dude, where do you think the money comes from?
Right. How does that help us make money, And then, maybe recommend a couple of personal finance podcasts or something to help them start getting that spending under control, right? So I think that's a really big mistake, is just asking for the raise for totally wrong reasons. Also, the timing issue that I mentioned earlier, if you ask for a raise at the wrong time, sometimes you sort of handcuff your manager, where your manager will agree with you that you're making a great case for why you should be paid more, but there just isn't any way to squeeze money out of the system. So those are really the two biggest ones that I'll highlight. And we already kind of talked about those for, if you're at your current job. Switching to the, when you're changing jobs, the biggest mistake, I just spent a day last week rewriting an article on this, is what I call the dreaded salary question, is early in the interview process when you're asked for your current and desired salary. So I call it the dreaded salary question because it's a really sneaky question. And when you're asked this question, you're usually in the mindset of compliance. You're trying to get to the quote unquote real interviews. So you're usually talking to a recruiter. This is like a screening call or something, just to kind of make sure, you're a decent candidate for this position, and do we want to continue? And they'll kind of pop that question in there. So what do if you don't mind me asking, what are you making right now? And what would you look for if you came over to work for us? And it sounds really innocuous. You're in a mindset where you want to just comply and answer the question so you can move on. But answering that question by sharing your current or desired salary can cost you a lot of money later. Google is pretty famous for this. I've coached several people who negotiated against Google, and it's much harder to negotiate when you've told them what your current salary is. It's just harder because Google will latch onto that number and they won't come off of it.
What about when your current salary is a matter of public record that is available on the internet?
So that's harder, but I still wouldn't tell them. If they want to go do internet research, let them do it. I will say, there's not a lot you can do about that, but stating your desired salary is actually the bigger part of the two-part mistake. They could probably ballpark your salary, or they have contacts. Like, they might be able to go find it. I don't think you should tell them your current salary, but if they can go find it, okay. But it's when you tell them your desired salary that now you've essentially boxed yourself in. And the way that I like to rephrase that question is, pretend they're not asking you what you want to make if you work there, which sounds like you have some sort of agency over what they're going to pay you. You don't. Pretend that they're asking you just to take a wild guess what they would pay somebody with your skill set and experience to do a job like the one that you're applying for at their company. I think when you frame it that way, and you start thinking about, well, what kind of information would I need to actually estimate that number? Then you realize that you're just taking a guess. That can be bad for you because you might undershoot it, which is very bad for you, right? And you say, well, I'd like to make $60,000. And they're thinking, well, we would have paid up to 85, but 60 sounds good. And usually what they'll do when that happens is say, well, how about 60 or 62 or something? They'll play ball. Or you drastically overshoot, which doesn't necessarily hurt you, but it's not great when you do that, just because it is possible that early in the interview process that you'll disqualify yourself because you state a number that's just too big. Like, they'll say, well, we can't talk to you because you're going to cost too much. But here's the reason that you should avoid sharing your current and desired salary as much as possible, and why it's the biggest mistake, and why I wrote almost 4,000 words on it last week. Really, what you want to do is defer that conversation as long as possible, because if you interview well, you do your job in the interview, which is your job is to tell a story about how the company will be better if you're a part of it. If you continue to do that through every stage of the interview process, you'll shift the company's thinking from what's the minimum we have to offer this person to get them to take this job to what do we have to offer this person to convince them to take this job? And those are two very, very different mindsets. One of them is they're looking for a low number that they can say that you'll agree to. And if you give them your desired salary, you make that pretty easy. Your current salary can kind of make that easy, but not as easy. On the other side, though, if they're thinking, what do we have to say to convince them? They're thinking big numbers. And so now they're going to look into their pay grades. They're going to look into the way they pay people. And they're going to say, well, this pay grade that holds the job that they're applying for goes up to 90,000. We want to leave some room on top to negotiate if they counteroffer us. So let's offer them 80 and see if they'll go at 80, and then we have some room to negotiate if we need to. Much different mindset than, well, they said they'd do it for 60, so let's just offer them 62. That brings them into the bottom of the pay grade, and we'll get them on board, right? So that's the biggest mistake that I see in salary negotiations, and it's sneaky because it seems like an interview question. It is not. It's a salary negotiation tactic that pops up early in the process.
Hey guys, just wanted to interrupt to say if you've ever wanted to come out and measure our beards to see how long they really are, we will be at Music City Code here in Nashville. It's the premier polyglot software development conference in Nashville, held June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd at Vanderbilt University. To find out more, check it out at musiccitycode.com. So I have it's not exactly personal for me, but Will and I have a friend that's going through this right now, and she was told by the company where she is contracting through the contracting agency, not the agency, but through the company that wants to bring her on full time, that she has to provide her last pay stub before they can start the conversion process.
I don't believe it. That's my response to that. I've heard that stuff a lot of times. I've never, and I mean this honestly, I've never actually seen a situation where somebody said that and then the process ended because they did not share that information. And so here's my however, comma. So let's say it does happen. Let's say hypothetically that she refuses to share that information. They won't bring her on. And this is, I'm moving now out of sort of strategy into just personal opinion. I don't know if I want to work for that company. If you're going to demand to see my pay stubs, I'm not asking you to see your pay stubs, right? I don't understand what that has to do with anything. We're trying to agree to the value that's appropriate for me to take this job and for you to employ somebody to do the job. So let's talk about that number. Asking me for my tax information, essentially, that's a little too personal for me. And that goes to the current salary part of the question. My sort of ace in the hole when it comes to the current salary part of the dreaded salary question is essentially to play an ethical kind of card, which I think is honest, or I wouldn't suggest it. But the company that you used to work for, the company whose W-2 you're about to ship over to this other company that you want to work for, they would not like that. You're sharing proprietary information about how they pay people that look like you. And I mean that, experientially. If you owned the company that employed her and you knew she was about to send her W-2 over to a different company and say, look, this is exactly how they paid me, you probably wouldn't appreciate that. And so yeah. I just think I don't like it. And I don't advise people to go work for companies that are really dogmatic about it and will not talk to you unless you give them proprietary information from other companies and how they paid you.
I mean, that's kind of what I advised her to do as well, is to just go, hey, look, this gets into contractual problems for me and for you and for, everybody else in the mix. And it's just a bad situation. Of course, she just started her career. And so like like how early on you kind of have the scarcity mindset about jobs.
Yep.
I don't think she's completely past that yet.
It's tough, but and I don't know, you guys you don't know me very well, but if you listen to, I don't know how many episodes or how many podcasts I've been on in the past years, it's I don't know, we'll ballpark it at 25. I don't know if I've ever gotten that fired up. It really frustrates me when companies try that stuff because they don't have any right to ask you for your pay stubs. They just don't. It's not their business. They want to employ you to do a job. Let's talk about that. But, like I said, I'm not asking the HR person or the recruiter to show me their pay stubs. It's none of my business what they make. So the scarcity mindset is really, really hard to defeat. It's one of the things when I coach people that we focus on the most is essentially I tell a lot of people, look, here's what I think you should say to the thing that they just asked you about. And you've just got to trust me. I know it's going to be really uncomfortable for you, but it's going to work out okay. And it works out okay. And this goes for recruiters also like to say, I'm sorry, I can't move on in this process unless you tell me what your current salary is. And it always turns out somehow, if you stand your ground, they come back and say, oh, well, we'll just talk about that later. And sometimes you got to resist 2, 3, 4 times. But I think it's another level when they're asking you to actually give them pay stubs. It just isn't any of their business. So it's hard for me to say that to somebody who is desperate and can't make rent next month and has a job opportunity in front of them and they need it really badly. I think that's a different situation. But in terms of a developer or somebody else looking for work, there are other developer jobs out there, even if you're early in your career. So maybe find one of those other jobs and don't go work for a company that's asking you to share proprietary information with them. I'll say this last thing and then I'll jump off my soapbox. The reason I don't like it is because they're asking you to do stuff that they probably wouldn't like other companies doing.
Yes.
And it reeks of hypocrisy to me. And I don't like it. They can't possibly, I don't know if they would, but they might sue somebody if they went just, putting their W-2 online and sharing it around on the internet, right? But they're asking you to do that for them to hire you. And so it just feels icky to me. I don't like it. And I like to work for companies that feel icky.
Well, that's completely fair. And I'm going to share that with her next time we talk. So
yeah. So kind of shifting gears here. What do developers need to know about making their or what their resume does for them as far as their salary? Like how to structure it so that it doesn't get in the way of their negotiations?
I love the way you phrase the end of that question, so it doesn't get in the way. So I'm going to have all kinds of links to share with you guys for your show notes after this episode, by the way. I've got the dreaded salary question link, and now I've also got a short little video of a resume teardown that answers this question pretty directly. But the answer is that as the person writing your resume, you need to remember that whoever is reading your resume is probably going to be pretty busy. And so usually you're writing a resume. I think you should write your resume so that the hiring manager who might want to bring you on board is able to skim it real time. And the reason is that as a hiring manager, I would frequently interview people. And the first time I ever saw their resume was when I called them, dialed their number, then went back into the email or the file or whatever system we had set up to book that call, pulled the PDF out of the file and opened it up on my desktop as the phone was ringing. So now you're answering the phone and I'm calling to interview you. Hey, Frank, this is Josh at Acme Corp. Is this still a good time for you? You still able to talk to it? Great. Well, I just wanted to talk to you about this position we're hiring for. And now I'm, skimming your resume real time as I'm talking to Frank here. So if your resume is written in a way, and I just did for a client, I just sent one back where it's just giant blocks of text with no formatting and no real thought to what's on the page, that resume is not going to get read, and it's going to get in the way of your ability to interview, because now your hiring manager is trying to figure out even a little bit about what you're about, what your history is, what your skills are. And they can't figure it out because you've got 3 pages of 9-point font in all bullet points with no formatting. So what you need to do is think very carefully about who's reading it and the situation where they're reading it. Who's reading it is probably the hiring manager that you care about anyway. And the situation is probably they're skimming it. They're not going to take your resume home with them and sit down in their, on their couch at night, mute the television and read your resume top to bottom word for word. That will not happen. So what you need to do is say, well, what's the stuff that I really need to know? What about my work history, my education? And then within each of those things, what are the real highlights that I need them to see? Cut the other stuff out. Highlight with bold font or whatever you need to do to make sure it really pops what you're trying to communicate to them. And then the last thing that I'll say about that is for each of those things, people like to write. I did this one time with a client. He sent me his resume and said, take a look. And I said, great. I just opened up Preview on my Mac, searched for the word I, and highlighted all the words I. And you could just see the whole document just covered in the word I. I did this. I did that. I have this experience. And then I did the same thing with the word you. YOU or company, and it never shows up. And my point is that they were never talking about the value they would add to the company in any way. That was actually a cover letter, by the way, but it's the same concept. So you need to say, I have this skill, and here's how it will add value to your business. I can write Ruby on Rails web applications and ship them totally independently so you don't have to supervise me, which means you'll move things faster. And so it's not just that I can build ROR apps, it's that I can do that independently and I will ship them independently and you won't have to babysit me while I do it. And that's valuable to the company. So that's the last thing is each one of those bullets needs to have an activity or a skill and also a business purpose or business result that will be driven by that skill to help the company or that helped your previous company where that experience came from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that.
Yeah, the only thing about that is like I just pulled up my LinkedIn with my resume, and gotta admit I got a pretty sinking feeling in my stomach.
It's really common because what you think about is how can I communicate every possible thing that might land me a job. The problem is that when you do that, you're probably disqualifying the people who most desperately need to hire you, and that's people who are really, really busy and they need somebody who's really good at one or two things. Those people don't have time to read a 3,000 word resume. Well, but I will say, I think it's okay to have your LinkedIn profile long because that's more searchable. I think there's value in having a lot of words that are searchable. Also, I think there's a difference between what's my master resume look like? Maybe my master resume is 3 pages of stuff. But then when I go to apply to Acme Corp, I read about Acme Corp online, I figure out what they're all about, and I trim my resume down so that it's very appealing to a hiring manager for the job I'm applying for at Acme Corp. And that might be half the size of the resume that I have as my master.
That's actually what I do as well. I've got the main resume, and then I've got a shorter, compressed version specifically for that. The big one's for the recruiters, and the small one, is for any kind of contracting type stuff because it's like they actually will convert.
Right.
Yeah. And I was going to say, one thing I like about academia is they make a distinction between your resume and your curriculum vitae, which, your curriculum vitae is that long master resume with all the stuff. I remember when, was it sophomore? No, it was my freshman year of college. My dad, who was a preacher before he retired, he switched churches after 14 years. and he was looking around at different jobs, and he was explaining to me how because I was saying, wow, your resume is really long. He's like, this isn't a resume. This is a curriculum vitae. It's like, my resume is this. And he showed me it was like 2 pages. And then his curriculum vitae was 3 or 4 pages long of all sorts of stuff, everything he'd done.
Yeah. And I think people are in the habit of sending out their CV everywhere. Right.
Yeah.
I think you just hit the distinction very, very well, which is most of the time, the job that you're applying for doesn't need to see every bit of history that you have. And in fact, it could work against you. If you've got a bunch of technologies in your CV that you've worked for in the past, but that either aren't germane to the job you're applying for, or that you wouldn't even want to do if they hired you to work with those technologies, those should not be on a resume that you submit to a company, right? Because they're like, oh, I see that you know Java. And you're like, well, yeah, but you don't want me to actually write any Java, do you? Right? That's not good. So just cut it.
Yeah, or, if spent part of your career as an addictions counselor, before you got into technology, you really don't want to put that on everything you send out to IT companies.
Right. I think that might be a good topic to come up in an interview, right? Like, my guess is that as an addictions counselor, you've got a lot of experience that might enable you, especially if you're client facing, to really tune into what clients need and provide great value to them. But that might be something that's better reserved for, a face-to-face conversation with a hiring manager, and not embedded in your resume.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, well, that's like, I have experience with Fox Pro. And I mean, I can't really say much. I do some Delphi development at my day job. But I have the Fox Pro experience, and it is not on the resume anywhere for that reason, because I don't want that to ever come up.
Right. You're like, yeah, when can you start? We need a Fox Pro expert. And you're like, oh, well, pass,
Yeah. Like, the only reason it should come up is like complaining about the old glory days, which, that works okay from like a sales perspective. Go, okay, I have done this stuff, and I remember how bad it was, when you're talking to the CIO and you're like, okay, I have done this stuff in the past. You can kind of build that empathy and, build the rapport, but you don't ever mention that as something you want to get paid for.
Right. Because the worst thing would happen is somebody would actually, pay for it.
Yeah. I have a feeling that, I can think of a lot of jobs that people have had previously that, they go, okay, this experience was useful, but I don't want to go there again. That one's definitely pretty much the top of my list is Fox Pro. So I guess, going back to the negotiations, what do you do? What are your options if you're, let's say you're trying to negotiate a pay raise and the answer is no? Like, how do you deal with that productively? Yeah.
So the first thing I'll say is that the no answer when you're asking for a raise is actually, it's a good result for you in terms of your long-term career. So it feels bad in the short term, but in the long term, getting a no when you ask for a raise gives you a lot of very useful information about your current situation. And so I think the first thing you should do, by the way, that's one of my salary mistakes, in terms of, asking for raises is giving up when you get that no, meaning that you don't say, okay, well, what does this mean for me? So when you get a no, really there are 3 answers that you will generally get. One of them is yes, that's great. One of them is no, that's not so great. And then the middle one is sort of not yet. And the not yet answer is interesting because it induces you to have a conversation with your manager about, okay, so why not yet? What do I need to do and when can we revisit this? But if you get past that and you get straight to a no, what that means is if you follow the method that I suggest, you've built a case with good reasons that demonstrate that you're adding additional value that wasn't anticipated when your last salary was set, and you've asked for a raise to a specific amount, and then you got the answer no, which means that either your estimation of the value that you're adding and the things that you're doing was off, or the company may not be a good fit for you anymore. And so I don't think you should necessarily say, if I get a no, I'm quitting, but it's time to kind of do some soul searching and say, okay, well, I think that I'm quite a bit more valuable than what they're willing to pay me. Do I want to stay here and work for less money than I think I'm worth to the company and that I'm worth in general? Or do I want to start looking around for opportunities where I can take advantage of my skill set and experience to make more money? The reason I phrase it that way is I think it's a really personal decision. I don't think that you should just take a no and say, well, that's it. I quit. I'm out. Because maybe you have just a really great job. You don't have to commute. They don't care if you're in the office during the day. They don't have any core hours. They don't mind if you take off at noon on Friday, to go pick up your kids from school. Those are all things that could be really valuable to you that aren't reflected in your paycheck. But I think it's worth then considering, what do I want to do about this? Do I want to go look for another opportunity, or do I want to stay here and be underpaid? But at least you've got a definitive sort of direction. You're either staying because there are other reasons you like the job, or you're going to look for another opportunity because you believe you're more valuable than the current company will compensate you for being.
I mean, that sounds good. I mean, that resonates with me because pretty early in my career, I jumped from one job that was, comfortable, easy hours, really relaxed, for like a $10K pay raise. And I went to this company that was it was like the second most messed up company I've ever worked for. The principal owners, I think, are still in prison for wire fraud now.
Great.
Yeah. And ended up like getting terminated for insubordination like 6 months later. And I could definitely tell anybody that jumping just because of salary is not necessarily very smart.
I totally agree.
And of course, on that one, the situation was, I didn't get my annual review. Like, we're supposed to get one, every year, and like it was like 4 or 5 months late, and they still hadn't gotten around to it. And I'm like, I had a house payment. We were talking about having our first child, and I'm going, okay, I can't figure out how to push them to the point where I get the review and get the raise. And nothing was moving, and so I jumped to this other opportunity, which was just a complete dumpster fire.
Right.
Yeah.
And Will's experience has helped me, because I had a place that I interviewed at before I started contracting with the state, and they, after 2 interviews, they wanted to hire me, but they said, "Oh, we weren't expecting that the first person we interviewed would be the one we wanted to hire, so we don't have it in our budget yet." And I came back with, "All right, well, make me an offer, have paperwork, I will sign, and I'll stop looking if I have a start date." And they didn't get back to me. I kept looking. I had the interview with the state, got the job, and then about 2 or 3 months, that was more than about 3 or 4 months into it, they came back to me. And at this point, the state was already talking about bringing me on as a permanent employee. And this place came back and said, "Oh, well, we're ready to bring you on as a contractor." And I'm like, I kind of got a good deal going, and they're wanting to bring me on full time as a permanent employee. And then they came back with more money. And I'm like, I talked to Will, and that's when he told me kind of what he just said on here. And I'm like, I'm just going to stick with what I've got. And, now I've got a stable job, and I'm really happy at it. So,
yeah, it sounds to me like you made the right decision. And, maybe you're fortunate that Will was there to share some hard-learned lessons
yeah,
to help you avoid goofing. I think that's something that is maybe a misnomer about what I do, which is I do coach people on salary negotiations, but a lot of what I do is help people to get the best result possible. And so that's sort of my promise when you work with me as a coach is I don't promise we're going to get you 10K more or 50K more. I promise that you'll be satisfied with the result. And that can be a lot of things to a lot of different people, but usually what it means is that they finish their process, they make the decision on which company they're going to go work for, they negotiate the best salary possible, and they feel really good that they got the right result for them. I recently coached somebody who, I won't name the names of the companies, but there were 2 big companies that you've heard of, that they had an offer from each one, and we negotiated each one and got a pretty good result. And the last, couple of phone calls that we had nothing to do with money, but just, we're just talking through, okay, well, this company has more opportunity for you to grow as a leader. They have a bigger need for your specific skill set, but they're a little bit younger of a company, and there's a little bit more risk there. On the other hand, this other company is bigger and more established, and I think it's going to be less interesting for you, but maybe a little bit less risky. And so just talking through those things and figuring out what people value. In his case, he wanted an opportunity. He was leaving a really great gig, and he wanted an opportunity to lead a team and to really have an impact on a product that he thinks is going to be a big product in the future. And so he went with that company. But he didn't make the right decision or wrong decision. He made the right decision for him, but I may have made a different decision, right? Depending on where I am in my life. So I think it's important to take all those factors into account and make the right decision for you. And understand that there's not a right and wrong answer a lot of the time in these situations. It's just understanding what's best for you.
Well, I guess that kind of gets us to the last thing. And this is kind of an odd question because it's probably not a huge slice of our audience, but there's 2 or 3 people out there, I imagine, that kind of have this problem. What do you do if you're already kind of towards the top end of the range for what your skill set is in a particular market? Like, how do you approach the negotiation to try to get a pay raise when you're probably already close to the salary cap? Not just like a company one, but like what the market will bear in your area.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't have maybe as taught an answer for this kind of thing because it's so situationally dependent. But usually what that tells me is it's time to expand your horizons and to find an opportunity to gain new skills and take your expertise to a more valuable place in a company. So here's what I mean by that. If we're talking to developers, let's say you're a senior developer, you've been, I don't know, you're about 20 years into your career. You're really, really good at what you do. But you're starting to hit the top of the pay grade for senior developer at your company and maybe even in the industry. Usually when I start kind of talking through a situation with that person, what I find is they've had opportunities to become a lead or to become a manager or maybe to be a CTO at a startup, and they've not taken those opportunities. And so the reason that they're near the top of their pay grade is not that there aren't opportunities, it's that they are not leveraging those opportunities, and they continue to kind of hang back in a job and a pay grade that a company can only pay you so much to do. Very few companies can afford to just keep paying developers more and more money. Google is one of them, right?
Right.
But for the most part, there's only so much value that a developer can add, even a really, really good, quote unquote, rock star developer. Because at the end of the day, they're writing code, they're writing tests, and they're shipping code into production. But as you get that 20 years of experience, the way that you get paid more is by adding more value to the company. You do that by helping set the direction of the company, or by mentoring other people, or by leading a team, or by helping develop a new product, or by taking a more senior role where you make bigger dollar decisions and impact on the company. So the first thing that I would want to know for somebody in that situation is, how did you get to be at the top of your pay grade? And what opportunities have you had to maybe step outside of that career path and leverage? And why did you either not get those opportunities or not take them? Does that make sense? I mean, it's not as clear as I know that it would be great if I could give an answer that, well, you do this thing and then they'll give you a 20% raise. But usually what's happened is you've just hit the peak of the things that you're willing to do for the company. You've hit the peak of what they can afford to pay you to do that small set of things, and you've got to find other things that you can do that are valuable. Usually that means managing a team. It means moving into a different part of the company, from maybe software developer to product manager, or something like that, where you can leverage that experience to do bigger, more valuable things for the company than, I almost said than just writing code. I don't at all want it to mean what developers do, but it's not diminishing returns, but you can only get sort of so much amplification on writing code. And sometimes, like at Google, you can write code that literally billions of people are touching, right? But usually it's just your customer base is your customer base. You need to find a way to do more valuable things with your experience that add more value to the company and to your customers.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's kind of what the point I've reached as well is like, it's sort of like looking at how you can do different online businesses and how those scale. Mm-hmm. And you kind of come into the same problem with software development. Like there's a certain point that you hit where you can't scale the software development side anymore.
And by the way, so I think we kind of approach this question like this is a problem to be solved. I know many people who don't see it as a problem to be solved, but are very satisfied, right? So they know that they've kind of hit the top of their pay potential at their company or in their industry, and they're totally fine with it. Because going higher would mean taking on more responsibility, and maybe they don't get their weekends anymore, right? So I think it's a trade-off. It's not just, I should be paid more because I've been working for 20 years. It's, well, maybe I like the fact that I'm making really good money, and I get my weekends and I don't have to work very hard at work. Maybe I have other interests that I prefer to focus on.
Yeah, this makes sense. I had a conversation similar to this with my mom. She's a nurse, and she reached the top of her pay grade at the hospital back when I was in college. So instead of, they weren't able to raise her salary, so they gave her a bonus at the end of the year because that's how we had our family vacations, apparently.
Nice. Thanks, Mom.
But But it was one of those things where she could have moved into management, but she was happy doing what she was doing. She'd tried management, didn't like it, and she was happy with it. And they worked something out where there wasn't a salary increase, but she got a bonus at the end of the year.
Well, I guess that kind of brings the other thing up too is, if you're comfortable with the salary at the top, I guess the option is also that you could negotiate for other things like more vacation days or remote work or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that would be my next move. I mean, that's kind of after base salary, and this is also true when changing jobs. That's kind of my move. And I like that strategy, is going to your company and saying, look, I understand that you can't really increase my salary. That's a lot of overhead for you, but I'm becoming more productive over time. And I think it's totally reasonable that I take another week of vacation every year, because I'm going to get more work done than most people who are being paid the same as I am anyway. It would be better for me, and I'll stick around longer and keep doing what I'm doing for you if I can have another, week of vacation and maybe an annual bonus that is, 2% of my salary or something like that.
Another thing that might possibly work is trying to elicit from your manager, like, how to go forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think having a dialogue with your manager is really important. So I'll let you, it sounds like you had more behind that, but yes, I like the idea of talking to your manager and saying, look, you and I both know that we're kind of near the top of the pay range for what I can make. What other options do we have? Because I like working for you. I like working for this company, but I'm wondering if maybe there's some way that I can continue working and bringing my expertise to the table, and being compensated more without having to budget for more base salary that, bumps me out of this pay grade. Let's talk about that. And just see what your manager says. Maybe they go to finance and they come back with an answer.
That actually sounds like a really great idea.
Yeah, it really does.
But I like that. Well, that kind of wraps up the questions we have for you. Josh, we want to thank you for coming on the show. And guys, use these tactics and information the next time you go in for a raise or start a new job. And don't forget to check out Josh's book, Fearless Salary Negotiation, for even more information. Josh, how can people get in touch with you?
So the easiest way to find me is I'm pretty active on Twitter. So if you have just a quick question you want to fire over, I'm at Josh Doody, JoshDoody, like howdy, on Twitter. Shoot me a question. I'll shoot you an answer. You can also find me over at fearlessSalaryNegotiation.com. That's where you can find my book, but also I have tons and tons of articles like the Dreaded Salary Question article, which I'll send you guys a link to, and some other articles and things that you can check out. So at Josh Doody on Twitter, and fearlessSalaryNegotiation.com are the best places to find me.
Awesome. Once again, thanks for coming on the show. And before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, Josh brought up the whole scarcity mindset, or I brought it up and then he went on a rant and then stopped. So here's my rant. Scarcity mindset is pretty much like the worst idea that you can ever have. It really doesn't matter what thing that you're into. Like if you're going into business or you're looking at, any part of your life, including things like social interactions, dating, all that kind of stuff. When you approach things from a mindset that whatever you're seeking is scarce, you tend to value it higher than the person or the other people involved in that interaction. And it really puts you at a massive disadvantage. And so I just want to caution people to start, kind of looking around in their life and looking at how they interact with the world and go, am I looking at this as if the other side of this is scarce, and is that actually valid? Because if it isn't, you're probably paying too much for too little, or you're not getting paid enough for something. It's a really pernicious and destructive thing that slips into our lives. Usually as a result of a lack of confidence or something like that. And it's worthwhile every so often to go back and examine that and see where it's coming from and if it's something that you really want to keep or not. So that's what I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.